Some of the other challenges we talked about initially, you had mentioned as one of your initial perceptions or observations that there's some disparities in the school. A lot of that revolves around some of the downtown schools. Some of that is along the lines of poverty levels and things like that. A lot of questions from the audience, and I know you and I have talked about just kind of that whole issue of all the schools may not be equal at this point. How do we address that? Your thoughts on maybe what we need to do with some of the downtown schools and how we can get that playing field level, as you mentioned?
Well, when you look at it, we have some schools that are high poverty, that are 80, 90% free and reduced lunch. And they present a challenge in terms of what we're doing. Because oftentimes those high poverty kids are the ones who are least prepared coming into kindergarten. They don't necessarily have two parents at home. And so it's a struggle. Some of those parents are working two jobs just to pay the bills. And so when the kids aren't ready to come to school, it's more of a challenge. So we've got a couple of approaches to that. We've identified what we call priority schools. These are some of our highest need schools, and we put more resources into those priority schools than we do other schools. So when you think of per pupil funding, a priority school is probably going to be receiving 1.5, 2 times more funding per child than a school that's not identified as a priority school. They have smaller class sizes. We've identified one of our best principals, LaShawn Smith, who is working at one of our schools, to go work with those priority schools to identify needs, provide them support. We take funds that we get from special categories. Example, Race to the Top funds was one of those funds that the state passes down that's very specific, and priority schools is one of the ways that we deal with that. We're doing some incentives around teacher pay to work on performance there. So we try to put as many resources as we can into those schools to increase performance.
Is this an issue that you think the business community should be concerned about? Do you think this is an issue that the business community could help engage with the school system to address?
This is clearly an issue that in terms of where the business can help us. Because oftentimes we only judge a school system by what we think is the bottom end of that scale. I want to make sure the bottom end of that scale is as high as any other school. That there shouldn't be a gap. Just because you're poor, you shouldn't be performing worse than somebody who's coming from an affluent school. And so there's a couple ways that businesses can engage. Example at Freeman, when they do an engineering program and those engineers come in and talk about their experiences, and they provide role models for those students in terms of seeing what education can do for them. They provide, in some cases, resources and technology and other resources. Being in the schools and providing that kind of mentoring. A lot of our students, we work with the Blue Ribbon Commission, for an example, and they have a youth enrichment zone. And the stats out of there are truly raised red flags. 80% of the students in the zone, that youth enrichment zone, are in single-family homes. Most of them are being raised by mothers. The number of grandparents who are raising the kids is staggering in that zone. The educational level of the folks in that area is most of them are high school dropouts, and they're trying to then raise kids and get them to a certain level. They want their kids to be as well educated as everyone else, but they don't necessarily have the skills to do that. And that's where the resources we put into the priority schools have got to do that. And then the business community. Now, your Rotary Club, I think, is partnering with Williston Middle School and going to be working with them on some projects. Those are the kinds of partnerships that we're looking. If a business would adopt one of our schools and work with that school on a sustained long-term basis, we can see some great results. And those are different kinds of partnerships that we would definitely welcome.
Some other ideas you've mentioned around some of the downtown schools. I know we've talked about magnets or charter schools or different types of programs that we might be able to look at to really enhance those. Some thoughts or ideas there?
I got a school downtown, and if you read the paper, it's obvious which one, Virgo, that was scheduled to open with 400 students this year. Well, that school opened with under 200. And because of various choice options and issues around AYP, that meant that 220 of those kids were in different schools by choice. So that tells me that if I've got 180 students left in that school, we as a system are doing something wrong in terms of the education we're providing there. So maybe we need to look at restructuring that school. And there are a couple of options. A magnet school, where we convert it to a specialty school, or we can look at charter. if you look at the legislation, the odds are the charter cap's going to be lifted. And I know there are charter schools chomping at the bit to come downtown. Well, I think I can do it better. And if I have the same flexibility as that charter school has, then I think we can do some things. And one of the ideas that I floated, and this is not my idea, I was talking to a couple of folks downtown about what would work there, is an idea of a sort of an urban prep academy. There's one in Chicago called Chicago Urban Prep. And that is a downtown school where it's strictly an academic focus and getting those kids ready to go to college. They've got a 100% success rate in their graduating class going on to 2- and 4-year colleges in some of the most challenging neighborhoods in Chicago. You look at what happens with the Harlem Children's Zone up in New York, same kind of success. You look at what's happening with several KIPP schools. So if I can create a charter school downtown or a magnet school, and I can do some creative and flexible things within that framework that I can't do in the public school because of the constraints there, then I think we create a model that'll bring folks back there. Also, most of those schools require you to have some kind of board, a governance board. Well, this is an opportunity for some of those downtown leadership folks to come together and staff that board and maybe provide some leadership downtown to turn that around and really make that a place where we don't have space and you got to enter by lottery.
I want to come back to charter schools, but before we do that, I believe Jim Lutzy at table 37 has a question around downtown schools.
Yes, about the possible desegregation or resegregation of schools in Wilmington.
When you look at Wilmington, and you look at in terms of housing patterns and where folks go, it makes that, it tends to concentrate poverty in certain areas. Folks, just in terms of where they can afford to live and where they have to live. My job as a superintendent is I came here, Jim, the lines were drawn, and my job is to make those lines work now that I'm here. I think the last election pretty much settled in terms of where the community was on that issue. I wasn't here when those lines were drawn, and all I can do is take the lines that were drawn and make them work within the framework of the resources I have.
So coming back to charter schools, so there's been a lot in the media about charter schools. Folks kind of fall in different sides of that issue. Just maybe a brief kind of overview education for the audience on charter schools, kind of pros and cons of how they work, and then maybe what impact they might have on our public school system.
A charter school is a public school. It is public dollars going to an individual school. Charter schools are almost like individual school districts within themselves. They have a board of directors, they have the principal, and they get funds from the state and from the local. So those are public schools. But they have more flexibility than traditional public schools. They can have a higher percentage of staff that's not certified. They can operate longer hours. They can have different pay structures. They're not required to provide transportation or meals. And so those kinds of different structures give them more flexibility than I have in traditional public schools. So I want to tap into that flexibility. The current cap is 100. I expect they'll lift it. It may go to 150. It may go higher. And if it's going to happen, then I want to be able to use that flexibility. Now, my concern is the current charter bill, which is SB 8, goes a lot further than just lifting the cap. It starts to talk about taking funds from that traditionally haven't gone to charter schools and moving them to charter schools. So I have concerns with some of the underpinnings of the charter law, but I think if the cap is lifted, it's going to give us an opportunity to do some things we haven't been able to do.
Okay. Tim, earlier you mentioned just about ready to finish up the strategic plan. Pretty much most of our businesses, have a strategic plan, and that's kind of what guides us over, the next several years. And as part of that, there are, various metrics that we're going to measure to know whether we're successful or not. Talk to us about what you see coming out of that strategic plan and what the top priorities over the next few years are for you and for the school system.
Well, when I got here, the board was in the middle of that strategic planning process. Nick Rhodes, who's here, and Ed Higgins and the other board members really said we needed a plan in terms of where we're going. And so we're about to finish off that draft of that plan and bring that large group back together to put that in place and get a final round of feedback. But the key components of that are academic achievement, business partnerships, and technology. Those are the three critical drivers in terms of what we're going to be doing under that strategic plan. And my hope is that it's a document that will evolve, will change. And there's some things we're looking at under example of academic achievement is our grading practices. Are we doing things grading-wise that's not sound? Dale Pelsley-Beckton, who's our curriculum instruction person, is leading up a group on that now, talking about how we can improve what we're doing with our grading, more rubric-based, more formative assessments, and those kinds of things to really strengthen that. The business partnerships, even though the plan's not done, I think we've seen fruits of that already. If you look at our business partnerships, they're up already this year. The number of folks coming into our schools from businesses is up. The perception piece that we saw from the survey, so I think we're starting to see that. And then the technology piece is an awareness piece, and then a leadership piece on my part to make sure that we do what we need to do with technology in schools.
Speaking of academic achievement, I believe Brad at table 23 has a question around metrics that we're using to measure success and maybe some of those that aren't on the EOGs.
I was just curious, what areas of education that don't fall on the EOG are important to you? How are you maintaining focus and measuring success in those areas?
Well, you've got traditional EOCs and test measures, which you've all seen over the years. But you think about it, what's our primary job? It's to get students graduated and ready for life into college. So we need to be looking at our graduation rate. We need to be looking at our percentage of kids entering 2-year, 4-year, or straight into the workforce readiness. Looking at remediation rates from the high school, from the college level. If we're sending kids to college, are we having to remediate those kids when they get there? Because that would then tell us that there's something we're not doing there. Looking at, we use a lot of in-house assessment in terms of checking reading, checking skills as we move along. So those are parts, some of the ones that are non-testing pieces that we look at. With principals and teachers, we're looking at instructional practices in the classroom. We're looking at content. We're adopting Common Core standards, which is national standards around what we teach in our schools. So that'll frame a little bit about what we're doing for assessments there. But at the end of the day, are we graduating them? Are we sending them on to college ready? And if we're sending them on to the workforce, are they sending them on to the workforce ready? I want to get to the point where, as businesses, you won't want to hire anybody who's not a high school graduate because of the quality of what we're putting out compared to folks who are dropping out. So at the end of the day, from a business, my challenge to business folks long term is only hire high school graduates, but only hire them because they're good quality candidates that we're putting out.
Past, present, future, digital. You live the moment. We'll make it last. Call us at 910-399-1820 or go online at ppfdigital.com.